Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, Brandon Scott from Locked On Wizards is going to be on to talk about Monte Morris. He spent all of last year in D.C. We'll talk about what he did for the Wizards and what he'll bring to Minnesota. Give some of my own thoughts on that as well. And then we'll also preview the big Wolves-Clippers matchup tonight in L.A. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Monday, everybody. And happy game day. The Wolves haven't played since Thursday night, believe it or not. And it'll be good to get them back on the floor here this evening in LA. That game's on NBA TV. We'll preview that a little bit later in the show. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7 for free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today. Again, that's both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can also follow the show on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right. Today on the show, going to have Brandon Scott from Locked On Wizards on here momentarily. I'm just going to play our conversation. We spent 15 or so minutes talking about the Wizards, and then also the point of the conversation, obviously, Monte Morris spent all of last year in Washington before was traded to Detroit this offseason, and he only played in 8 games because of a preseason quad injury. So I thought it made sense to talk to Brandon. He's one of the co-hosts over at Locked On Wizards. So we talked a little bit about Monte Morris and what he brought to the table in Washington, what we can expect him to do in Minnesota. After that conversation, I'll give a couple of additional thoughts. Just doing a bit more watching of what Monte's done over the last couple of years, and then also just digging into some numbers. So I'll hit that at the end of the conversation with Brandon, and then we'll get into Wolves Clippers previewing the matchup here that we'll see Monday night. All of that's upcoming here on the show. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my conversation with Brandon Scott of Locked On Wizards. All right, as promised, being joined by Brandon Scott of Locked On Wizards. We're going to talk a little bit of Monte Morris here, get the Wizards perspective. Of course, Morris coming over for the Pistons, but only played 8 games with Detroit this year, spent, I guess all of last year as a primary starter for the Wizards. So we'll get to that in a second. But in the wake of the trade deadline, the Wolves just recently played the Wizards right before the deadline, a couple weeks before, I guess. So I just wanted to get your quick thoughts, Brandon, on like, what do you think about the rebuild? What do you think about the Gafford trade? At first glance, that seemed to make sense to from my perspective at least. But what are your thoughts about what the Wizards did at the deadline and where they sit right now?
It's definitely a process. We're kind of in a gray area where we haven't really officially started our rebuild yet. The deadline was big for us because we were trying to move off a lot of these veteran contracts, and we were able to get a first round pick for Gaff. But in the case of Kyle Kuzma, we have time now. I don't believe his value is going to get much higher, and I think that he could be dealt at the draft or in the offseason. But he does have a team friendly deal, and he eventually is going to be moved. But with Tuus Jones and DeLon Wright, he didn't get much in return as far as other teams what they were willing to give up. So I get not dealing him, and he could be a buyout candidate. Matter of fact, he definitely is. But in the case of Tuus Jones, a lot of people definitely thought he should have been moved. And there are reports coming out of the organization that they do want to re-sign him, which the rebuilding team, him being the floor general, it wouldn't be a bad thing. But I was left wanting more. Now going back to the deal, I believe it was a good deal. Now Daniel Gafford, very popular guy. I actually interviewed a guy, really nice guy. Did they necessarily need to move him per se? No, but there was a mandate from owner Ted Leonsis that said that they needed another first-round pick in this year's draft, and they went ahead and they did that. So that was their best chance to do that. But me and my co-host Ed, we both believe that the Wizards were asking way too high as far as the price and tag for Kyle Kuzma. He was this close to becoming a Mad, but 2 first-round picks is just, I think there's a lot to ask. So they could have done more, but they have time. But I think my biggest problem are 2 things. 1, the timeline, and 2, playing time for our young cast. Denny's already starting, but Bilal Coulibaly, he needs minutes. What is Corey Kisper's place in the organization? So there's still a lot of questions, but I believe in this front office. So I think we're going to be all right. We just got to wait a little longer.
Yeah, and of course, Tuus Jones being from Minnesota and played for the Timberwolves. The Wolves, Flip Saunders traded for Tuus Jones on draft night, several years ago, and there was a lot of people in the Twin Cities that wanted the Wolves to get Tuus Jones, and we talked about it on Locked On Wolves. We talked about it on the Minnesota basketball party show we did with Locked On Minnesota, and there was like this clamoring for Tuus, and the 2 problems were, 1, the Wolves didn't have any first-round picks to give, and 2, financially, it would have been really tough for the Wolves. I think he's like $12 million or something like that. They would have had to trade Kyle Anderson and include somebody else. There probably would have had to be a third team, at least in terms of supplying a pick. And apparently the Wolves are interested, but and there were reports the Wolves offered, I think, 3 to 4 second-round picks. And I mean, they have second-round picks to give. But so I was a little surprised they didn't trade him at all. And Delon Wright's another name the Wolves were reportedly interested in. And my guess is that he may have been a fallback if they could have gotten Monte Morris is kind of my guess.
Yeah, it's questionable because a lot of people in the fan base, they wanted a lot of moves because, again, we want a free rebuild. Going way big, going back to Tommy Shepard being a GM, and a lot of mistakes were made, and we're still dealing with those mistakes now. And, if you look at Bradley Beal, we held on to him way too long. We didn't get the return that I thought we could have gotten for him. And in my opinion, the year that we traded Russell Westbrook to the Lakers, we should have moved Bradley Beal. And Golden State had a package where they were offering us the 7th pick, the 14th pick, Wiggins and Wiseman. I thought we should have took that, but they took the loyalty route. They signed to a Supermax, and history tells itself. He's down in Phoenix, but we're still dealing with the fallout from Tommy Shepard. So it's a process. This new front office, Will Dawkins coming over from Oklahoma City. He has, the blueprint in Oklahoma City is, he's trying to draw that in Washington. So it takes time. But another factor to look at is that, now 2026, 2007, they're talking about moving the Wizards and the Washington Capitals over to Virginia. So that kind of adds another dynamic. Do they, now they kind of need to get rolling as far as rebuild because they got to put a winning team on the court, especially making a move to Virginia, where obviously, people aren't going to pay good money to watch a losing team. So
yeah, there's a lot of layers there for sure. Timberwolves fans are used to layers. There's always layers with the Wolves, and like with the Wolves, it's also new ownership transferring over to A-Rod and Mark Lowry. That happens, I believe, at the end of this calendar year is when they're supposed to make the final payment to become majority owners. So there's all they're butting up against that second apron, the luxury tax. Like, are the Wolves going to end up being willing to pay it if this is a legit finals contender? So, and actually that could come into play depending on how they do in the playoffs, because there's some unlikely incentives that come for Mike Conley. And so they actually added salary by doing this Monte Morris deal. So I do want to talk about Morris. As I mentioned, he spent the full season last year in Washington, played 62 games, started 61 of them, was traded in the offseason to Detroit, I believe, for a second-round pick or 2, something like that.
Oh, yes,
sir. It was 1 second-round pick?
Yes, sir, 1 second-round pick.
Yeah. And I mean, like, he was traded to Washington from Denver, and Tim Conley, of course, running the Wolves. There were rumors in the offseason he would consider going to Washington. Also, there's a lot of weird Wolves-Wizards threads here, I guess. But Conley had initially drafted him, signed him to the extension, and then he was traded to Morris was traded to the Wizards. You got to see him for a full year last year, or I guess 2/3 of a year when he was healthy. What are your, the overall just impressions of Monte Morris as a player? What did he bring to the Wizards?
What he brought to the Wizards, I guess when you're looking at the question of how Monte Morris will fit any team, it really depends on the system, because in Washington, we're used to having a point guard who has some speed. We had John Wall for 10 years. We had Russell Westbrook for 1 year. So we're used to having a point guard who can attack the paint, collapse defenses, and really utilize shooters. And with Monte Morris, well, let me backtrack a little bit. The year before, we had Spencer Dinwiddie, which, he didn't push the pace. He kind of bogged down the offense. And so when Monte came over from, Denver, first of all, we had to sacrifice, because the 2 biggest issues we had last year was 3-point shooting and defense. We gave it up with KCP going to Denver. So, but, looking at Monte, he does his job. And the biggest thing about Monte is his consistency. He's not a guy who's really going to push the pace a lot. He's not a guy who really has a repertoire of post moves, to attack the basket, more finesse, but he does his job. He shows up, he does his job. He's going to orchestrate the offense. He's going to get other people involved. I mean, if you look at his stat line, I mean, he shot 38% from three, so he's definitely has the ability to stretch the floor and shoot at a high percentage from 3-point range. He had a career high 5.3 assists. So, yeah, I mean, when you compare him to Tyus, and it really here's the thing about him and Tyus, that if you look at assist to turnover ratio, those two were actually top 5 in the NBA the last couple of years. So, the name of the game for both of them is consistency. Just doing your job, being that floor general, utilizing shooters. And so Monte, like I said, my expectation was he was going to push the pace a little bit, which didn't totally get there. But I don't think that's on Monte. I think it was more on the system that he was in. But he's going to do his job. So if you need a guy who's going to be there, hard nosed. I mean, he got injured a few times. I think he broke a tooth. He ate a piece of the floor. So he's a guy who's going to die for loose balls. He's got a dog in him. He's going to work hard. It's just, I guess it really goes off of your system and what your expectations are. If you're looking for a guy who's going to attack the basket, he's not going to be that guy. He's going to be kind of midway when it comes to pace. But the biggest thing is he's going to show up and do his job.
Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals. That's a billion with a B, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can find it also on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. Yeah, and really, I mean, that's the Wolves. That describes exactly what the Wolves are looking for. Is the Wolves play at a slow pace. They're one of the slowest teams in the league. And you look at the Denver teams that Monte Morris played for, they were usually in the back half of the league in terms of pace. So it does fit. And, there's similarities. Actually, you mentioned the low turnover or leading the league in assisted turnover ratio. The Timberwolves have, I mean, the other, like the league leaders over the last 5 years, I think all of them but one are like Tuus Jones, Mike Conley, Monte Morris. Jordan McLaughlin doesn't play enough minutes to do it, but he had a stretch a couple years ago where he had like 55 assists to 1 turnover over the course of like 6 weeks or something. So that's what the Wolves are looking for, because you're just looking for somebody to take care of the ball, especially late in games when Anthony Edwards is running a lot of that offense anyway. But when the offense bogs down, you need somebody to actually run set plays. Yeah. And Mike Conley is great at doing that. Jordan McLaughlin's been fine, but Monte Morris is somebody who's been there, done that on a bigger stage, done it with more consistency. He's been a better shooter for his career than McLaughlin. One of the things that interests me the most about Morris is just digging a little bit into some of the numbers where he gets his shots. It seems like he's got a little bit of an in-between game. He is comfortable kind of playing in the middle of the floor, like pulling up from the elbows around the free throw line, just trying to, instead, like you said, instead of getting all the way to the basket, or instead of only shooting threes off the bounce, he's either catching and shooting, or he's getting somewhere in the middle, kind of probing and finding a shot in the middle of the floor. Is that something that you felt like he added to the Wizards? I guess I don't know as a team, what the Wizards shot profile was last year, but it seems like that's something he could bring to the table, is something of an in-between game.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the best description of him, is the in-between game. I mean, he's a guy who's definitely a mid-range guy. That's his big part of his game. So he's more of a combo guard. I'll say that. So, you can kind of mix and match where you put him. He can play point guard. He can play shooting guard in the second unit. He's got a lot of different variables to his game. Like I said, he's not a guy like John Wall or Russell Westbrook or John Moran is going to attack the basket. He's more methodical. He's a guy, reset the offense. He's definitely be more of a floor general. So, yeah, absolutely. More of a mid-range guy. Like I say, he can pop those three-point shots, but is he a Steph Curry out here? Nah, he's not a guy who's going to sit back there and hit him from a big volume, but he's a guy that you can depend on to hit that shot.
Yeah. One of the things that we're hearing a lot about him is that he's a really good locker room guy, a good teammate. Obviously, Tim Conley drafted him, extended him, and he wouldn't have been the one that traded him either, and now is acquiring him. So he obviously is a big fan. In terms of interaction with teammates, what you heard around the guys, around the locker room, like was he seen as a good locker room presence, kind of a, not like he was a super, wily old vet. He was like in year 5 or 6 with Washington, but in terms of off the floor, the way he interacted with teammates, is that all positive as well, as far as you're concerned?
Oh, absolutely. He's from Grand Rapids near Flint, Michigan. So him and Kyle Kuzma had a close relationship because Kyle Kuzma's from Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
So they had that connection. I never heard much, if anything, negative about his locker room presence within the organization. Because believe me, the last 3 years, the Wizards have had her instances. And no, he's a good locker room guy. He's a guy who, for younger players, he's definitely going to teach people. He's going to be lead by example. He's a great guy to talk to. He's a good guy who comes and he's ready to work hard. So, if you're looking for a guy who wants to work hard, who's going to be that dog, who's going to dive for loose balls, who's going to be more of a culture guy, he is definitely a guy you want on your roster. Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. He started like the whole year, and he, like you said, he's more of a combo guard, can do a little bit of everything, but can play off the ball because of his catch and shoot ability. What were your impressions of him defensively? Most of the numbers defensively for him are kind of a mixed bag. Like, depending on where you look, it seems like he's solid, but obviously he's not the biggest guard either. How would you describe what you saw from him on defense?
He's not much of a defender, but he's a guy who's going to put effort on the defensive end, if that makes sense. Like, he's not a stopper. And, that's been an issue we've had in Washington since the departure of Westbrook. We haven't had a guy at point guard who can defend. This year, Tyus, as Tyus on the defensive end, he's not a stopper, but he's a guy who's going to get active in passing lanes. Yeah. He's going to put the effort. So that's all you can ask for. He's a guy who's going to put the effort out there, but he struggled against bigger point guards. Going against guards like SGA, man, he couldn't hold his own. So, that's why he's a guy who can come in and he can definitely start, but he's best served on the second unit and change the pace point guard, in my opinion, because he does have those defensive deficiencies.
Okay. That's pretty much all I got. I mean, unless there's anything else that you want to share about Monte Morris, his time in Washington, or thoughts in general. I mean, anything else to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, you're getting a good guy. You're getting a guy who, again, is going to be a locker room presence. He's going to work hard. Again, he's not great at any one thing, but he's a good overall player who's definitely going to make you guys a better team. So definitely, you're getting a good one. So
that's exactly what Wolves fans are looking for, is just somebody who's going to kind of be a steady hand. Give Mike Conley a break, right? That's the other thing. The Wolves have a bunch of back-to-backs coming up. Conley's only sat like 4 games this year. So just having somebody that can come in and be that veteran presence and be solid, that's exactly what Wolves fans needed to hear. All right. Appreciate you coming on, Brandon. And look forward to, I think Wolves Wizards have one more game, right? I think they still got to come to Minnesota at some point.
Oh, absolutely. So we'll see how we do, man.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate you coming on, Brandon.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, man.
All right. So good conversation with Brandon. And, a couple things to add. I alluded to this a little bit kind of towards the end of our conversation, but what Monte Morris does so well, and I have a better recollection of him doing this in Denver a couple of years ago. Well, for multiple years in Denver, 2 years ago and prior, is he probes the middle of the defense so well. He has, I alluded to his in-between game a bit towards the end of the conversation. And that's something that the Wolves need a little bit more of. And it sounds weird because I'm always harping on Anthony Edwards' shot selection and, basically Ant shoots too many mid-range jumpers, right? But it's different with Anthony Edwards than it is with somebody like Monte Morris, because Ant isn't very often probing to then find a pass, find a passing lane to a wide open jump shooter or somebody cutting to the basket. Ant is looking to score when he gets downhill. And a lot of times that's a pull-up jumper. Sometimes he puts himself in a tougher spot. He tries to hit a turner, back somebody down, tries to hit a turnaround, or he goes all the way to the rim. He doesn't get into the middle of the defense and then look to distribute, right? That's Kyle Anderson's MO. That's what opposing teams know that Kyle Anderson is going to do, so they can play him to do that. But Monte Morris is a good enough three-point shooter and a good enough mid-range jump shooter and a willing mid-range jump shooter and a willing passer, because he is truly a point guard. I know Brandon said he's got some combo guard tendencies, but he is a point guard with the ability to score. And it's the threat. And this was something I was excited about with Mike Conley last year when the Wolves acquired him, was because Conley does have that floater game, and he had developed this chemistry with Rudy Gobert in Utah where you can't tell if Conley's shooting a floater or if he's going to throw a lob, and he can do it with both hands. And I don't think we've seen all that many Conley floaters. It feels like recently there's still the threat of that, and he can use it if he wants to. When he turns the corner, is he going to throw a lob to Rudy? Is he going to shoot a floater? Is he going to kick it back out? But Monte Morris is at this stage of his career versus this stage of Conley's career. There are similarities, but Monte Morris is more likely to pull up and just shoot an elbow jumper, or pull up, fake the elbow jumper, and kick it to a wide open shooter in the corner. And then you've got guys like Anthony Edwards, who catch and shoot is like over 46% this year, which is bonkers. Mike Conley is like 43% catch and shoot and has been for the last several years of his career. And, everybody, the Wolves actually we talked about this the other day on the show. There's a bunch of guys in the Wolves that are legit awesome catch and shoot shooters. And Monte Morris probing the middle of the defense and adding that element that they don't currently have. Kyle Anderson does it, but teams don't respect his ability to shoot the ball or his ability to finish at the rim, so they could play off of him. Monte Morris, they know he could shoot the three. They know he could pull up and shoot a legit jumper, not a weird Kyle Anderson push shot or a scoop shot near the rim, but like a jumper from 14 to 18 feet. So they're going to have to play all of those things with Monte Morris. And because he's such a good passer and has such a high basketball IQ, that adds just this other dynamic element to the team. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been good catch and shoot threes too, right? And he's so good at finding soft spots in the defense without the ball. Like, relocating is something that the Wolves have a bunch of guys. Like, this doesn't show up on the stat sheet. They've got guys like Alexander-Walker, and I would have put Troy Brown Jr. in this category too. They've got, and obviously Jaden McDaniels has gotten better at it. Guys that know to relocate on the perimeter to create better angles and passing lanes for the ball handlers that are penetrating, whether it's Ant or Mike Conley or Jordan McLaughlin, or sometimes it is Alexander Walker or now Monte Morris, to relocate and create those passing lanes where they're going to find an open jumper because the guy with the ball in his hands is looking for that open passing lane. And Monte Morris is adept at all of the above. There are similarities to Mike Conley. There are similarities to Jordan McLaughlin. And that's a good thing, right? He does all of those things well and has experience doing it on a big stage with a winning team with stars around him, going back to his time in Denver. And it's really a seamless fit for the Timberwolves. And also just adding another capable rotation player that could play playoff minutes to a team that really only has an 8-man rotation. And with McLaughlin in and out, and Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. hadn't been in the rotation. Now you're just adding a ninth guy. Like, I was going back and looking at when the Wolves beat the Clippers a few weeks ago. They only played 8 guys in that game. And now you add a ninth guy to that could play a reasonable amount of minutes in the playoffs, and that's going to make a big difference. All right, let's close the show today by looking at the matchup specifically against the Clippers. We should see Monte Morris play in this game. We'll talk about what to expect, what happened the last time these teams squared off. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class-exclusive Google Built-In is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. The incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, which has room up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the new Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, let's look at this Wolves-Clippers matchup. We saw the Clippers last nearly a month ago, and that was the first matchup between these two teams. It was weird. They didn't play them at all in October, November, December, and now it's been a month since we've seen them. We get them 3 more times here over the final 2 months of the season. The last matchup, Minnesota's one of just a couple of teams, well, I guess more accurately, 6 teams since the beginning of December to beat the Clippers. That's right. LA, since December 1st, has gone 27-6. They were 8-10 back on December 1st. They've gone 27-6 since then. And now they're lumped together in that top 4 in the West. Currently, as of me recording this, the Timberwolves are alone atop the West, and they're going to be, because Sacramento and OKC still have to play on Sunday. So no matter what happens there, the Timberwolves will be in sole possession of first place. But the Clippers and Nuggets are just a half game back. The Thunder are 1 game back. So there's 4 teams within a game. And the Clippers will come into this game just a half game behind Minnesota. Of course, the Wolves won the first matchup between the two. Since then, since January, what day was it? January 14th. So nearly a month. The Clippers have only lost twice. They've gone 10-2 since the last time the teams have matched up. And again, I'll say it one more time because it's so crazy. They're 27-6 since December 1st. So roughly, I mean, what is that? That's 2.5 months. So that's like 10 weeks. Crazy. They did barely beat the Pistons on Saturday. The Wolves, of course, haven't played since Thursday. So for better or for worse, they've had 3 days off. There could be a little bit of rust. I would think at this point in the season, the rest is more helpful. We could talk about rust after the All-Star break, which is only, now less than a week away. But on Saturday against the new look Pistons team with, after making all the trades they did last week, Detroit only lost by 6 to the Clippers. Pistons were up by 9 at halftime in that game, and the Clippers had to pull ahead in the fourth quarter. A big Paul George game. Kawhi's led them in scoring a bunch lately. He also had a good game, but Paul George had 33. And for the Pistons, by the way, Troy Brown Jr. had 8 points, hit a couple of threes off the bench. I think he made his first 2 shots. And Shake Milton played 12 minutes off the bench for the Pistons as well. And they were competitive, right? Like Cade had a good game. Jaden Ivey had a good game. The Clippers are still, we've seen this for the Wolves a bunch, right? You play down to the competition a little bit. The Clippers are have the number 3 offensive rating in the league. They're just outside the top 10 in defensive rating. And the last time these two teams faced off, that was the game where Rudy Gobert airballed those free throws in the first half, consecutive free throws. Russ is laughing on the bench, etc. And then at the end of the game, Rudy Gobert hits all 4 of his clutch free throws, and Westbrook biffs a wide open layup right at the end that would have made it a 2-point loss for the Clippers instead of a 4-point loss. Then he had one other really terrible play. I think he missed another really easy shot. So that's the lasting memory from that game. Minnesota did a really good job on Paul George. He had just 16 points and 19 shots. It was 4 of 13 outside the arc. The rest of the Clippers shot the ball pretty well from deep. Norman Powell was the one that killed them, hit some corner threes in this game. He had 24 points on 12 shots, was 6 of 9 shooting threes. But the stars, Kawhi was fine. But overall, this was one of those other games, one of those in that stretch of just crazy turnover games for Minnesota, where Ant, Cat, and Jaden McDaniels combined for 13 of the Wolves' 17 turnovers in this game, and they still held on to win. They had a pretty big lead, but then in the fourth quarter, LA outscored the Wolves by 9. It got tight at the end. Rudy had to hit those clutch free throws when they were intentionally fouling him, and ultimately the Wolves pulled away. Ant was huge. He had 33, 9, and 6, was efficient, got to the line 12 times. Rudy had 15 and 18 and 4 blocks, really controlled the paint against the Clippers. And LA hung in this game because of the Wolves' turnovers and because of their 3-point shooting, and especially from Norman Powell. So I should also say, overall for the season, the Clippers are pretty middle of the pack in terms of both attempts, or in terms of attempts. They're actually number 1 in 3-point percentage, though. And the Wolves are number 3 in percentage. So we'll very likely see a bit of a shootout in this game between the Wolves and the Clippers. James Harden's 42% on the year. Paul George is at 40%. There are other high volume guys. Kawhi is shooting 45% from 3, which is kind of crazy. Norman Powell's almost 45% from 3. So we're probably going to see a lot of 3-point attempts. This is one really efficient offensive team in the Clippers against the league's best defense of the Wolves. One, I would say, middle of the pack defense with the Clippers versus a pretty middle of the pack offense for the Wolves. Now, it's also on the road. The last time the Wolves played the Clippers, it was in Minnesota. The one other thing to keep an eye out for is the Clippers get to the line a bunch, and they get offensive rebounds. They're a well-rounded offense. The Wolves are prone to stretches where they struggle on the defensive glass. They've been better of late overall, but that's still a concern. And then also they're prone to stretches of fouling a bunch. And again, overall for the season, we talked about this probably a week ago, is Minnesota is still top 10 in defensive rebound rate. They're top 10 in avoiding fouls as a defense. But this is more peaks and valleys, right? It's not consistent. Like they've consistently, had a great 3-point line defense. They've done a good job at forcing opponents into tough shots, contesting shots. They've consistently been good in certain areas, protecting the paint, etc. But they're not always there. It's peaks and valleys when it comes to defensive rebounding and when it comes to not putting opponents on the line. So those are the things that would concern me the most in this game for Minnesota. And of course, allowing some of those corner threes to guys like Norman Powell would be a bit of a concern as well. All right. That's all we have for you today on the show. Of course, after the Clippers game Monday, this is the front end of a back-to-back for Minnesota. They are in Portland on Tuesday night. So consecutive 9:30 p.m. Central tips. I should say Monday's game is on NBA TV as well. 9:30 Monday, 9 o'clock on Tuesday against Portland on the back half of a back-to-back. So Tuesday's show will be the post-game pod for Monday. We'll talk briefly about Portland, and then we'll also see Portland again on Thursday of this week too. So big week ahead, big West Coast trip before coming back home prior to the All-Star break. It'd be imperative for the Wolves to win at least a couple of games on the road here. Beating the Clippers would be real nice to secure at least the split in the season series against LA, heading into those 2 consecutive games in Portland and then the All-Star break after that. By the way, we'll talk, of course, more about the All-Star break later in the week with a couple of Wolves, Ant in the skills and Cat in the 3-point competition, both playing in All-Star Saturday night. So we'll talk more about that later in the week. All right. That's all we got for you today on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now you can also find it on the aforementioned Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.